If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. This is part 2 of a series on the 7 habits of highly effective aging. The habits to be discussed include keeping self-esteem, maintaining fitness, being busy, remaining connected, being happy and making others happy, fighting for rights, and planning for fourth age. In this segment, we discuss habit 2, maintaining fitness for aging well. All right, so Corbin, in this episode, we move on to habit number 2, maintaining fitness. And according to the article, which again, we'll have it linked in the discussion notes, there are 2 dimensions to fitness, physical and mental. A third age elder needs to maintain a perfect physical health through balanced diet and regular exercise, including walking, yoga, and also keep mental strength through regular workouts like meditation, mental games, puzzles, etc. A regular documented plan will help to keep the elderly both physically active and mentally agile. Again, they kind of are emphasizing the elderly, and yet they're talking about third age, which we talked about in the last episode. Just a little bit more bothersome.
Right.
But I think there's a little bit more that we can dive into with this because, personally, I think when we look at dimensions of fitness, it's a little bit more complex than just physical and mental. And I think there's a lot more than just balanced diet and regular exercise and those things to talk about. So let's kind of start first with just kind of talking about the dimensions to fitness.
Okay. What are the dimensions to fitness?
Well, hopefully you recall from your exercise science classes that we tended to kind of divide fitness up into 2 dimensions. We have the health-related and the neuromotor skill-related physical fitness. And of course, we can go beyond that into some of the other components of mental health. And I think we could talk about those more independently. But do you recall what the health-related components of physical fitness are?
Cardio endurance and muscular endurance.
A little bit deeper than that. There's actually cardiorespiratory endurance, muscle strength, muscle endurance, because those dimensions are a little bit different. And I think maybe in one of the episodes, we can kind of dive into the training or the exercise continuum a little bit further. Then there's also flexibility and body composition. So those 5 are considered to be the health-related components of physical fitness. And then when we look at the neuromotor skill-related components of physical fitness, that's where we get into speed, power, agility, balance, coordination, and reaction time.
Why are these important to those that are aging? And what would you say, in your opinion, what would be the most important?
I mean, I think they're important across the spectrum of ages. So whether we talk about first age, second age, third age, fourth age, having health-related fitness as well as maintaining and even developing our neuromotor skill-related physical fitness are going to be important. Which one is most important? I don't think any is more or less important than the others. And I find as an exercise scientist, having studied exercise physiology, that there has kind of more historically been a greater focus in our field from a more academic standpoint on cardiorespiratory endurance, and certainly much more on the health-related side rather than the neuromotor skill-related side. And I think that's been a bit of a shortcoming of our field over the years. And we're finally, I think, catching up on that a little bit. That, first off, in the health-related components of physical fitness, cardiorespiratory endurance is certainly important. And we talk about that pretty regularly on the podcast. But even more important is muscle strength and muscle endurance. Because without muscle strength, first of all, then there's no muscle endurance because you have to have the capacity to contract the muscles with reasonable amount of force to be able to do functional activities. And we need to be able to do that in a sustained effort. But without muscle strength, muscle endurance, how can we possibly maintain our cardiorespiratory endurance? And oftentimes there's an emphasis on cardiorespiratory, aerobic type activity, and people tend to favor that, do more of that. The intensity gets less and less as we age because in the process of doing only cardio, we lose muscle mass, we lose the capacity to do physical work. And so the amount of work that we can do actually declines over time. And of course, flexibility and body composition. We talk about body composition a lot, that favoring a healthy body composition is important. But when we look at neuromotor skill related components of physical fitness, oftentimes we think of those as just the athletic side of performance or fitness. But in reality, as we age, we need to, at the very least, maintain, if not try and improve, our agility, which is our ability to accurately and quickly change direction. And anytime we are encountering some kind of obstacle, we have to be able to maybe change our movement pattern in order to accommodate. So agility is not just simply running these cone drills that we see in sport. It's being able to walk down a road and adjust ourselves quickly if we maybe lose balance or if there's an obstacle on the road or whatever it might be. Balance, coordination, reaction time, all those are important as we age. And then we tend to think, well, speed, power is only sport related. But again, speed is just simply the rate at which we are moving. And we see people, or we almost have this expectation as we age to slow down, to be moving, a little bit slower. We picture the elderly person, and I have kind of air quotes around that because we don't really necessarily like that term. But when I think of elderly, I think of the frail, declining individual. And when we see that person kind of shuffling slowly across the street, that's that person that we're like, oh God, I'm never going to get through this intersection because this person's taking forever to get across the street. We don't necessarily need to slow down like that. And so speed and power is just basically the rate at which we can do work. And so to be able to move quickly, we need a certain rate of power. So I think those are worth discussing a little bit as we, look at preparing for third age and then on into the fourth age.
I feel like from what you're saying, it would behoove us to start training like an athlete.
No,
No?
I don't like that phrasing when it comes to the fitness industry in general, because we tend to think, training an athlete is doing all of the intensive neuromotor type of training that is associated with athletics, high intensity plyometrics, a lot of sprint training. And then, I could picture, you see people at the gym that they're doing the sled pushes and, all of this stuff that we normally do with athletes. I have a bit of an issue with that because when you look at training an athlete is training to go well beyond the normal ranges of human physiological performance. I mean, that's what athletics is all about, exceeding our capacities. And athletes beat the crap out of their bodies in order to perform. I mean, very few athletes get to the end of their career and are healthier than they were at the beginning of their career. They have injuries, their bodies are beat up. Athletics is not necessarily a healthy behavior. And so when we say we want to train people like an athlete, no, you don't want to train a person like an athlete. You want to maybe do some of the athletic-like activities that we do. I mean, certainly plyometrics, working on balance, agility, those types of things are all important, but we're not doing it to the capacity that we're doing it as an athlete. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're saying not to go that 110%, but possibly stick within that 85% range of
Well, I hate
effort.
that whole percentage thing anyhow, because to say I give 110%, you can't give more than you have.
Well,
And so that whole athletic language, again, that's where we start getting into this whole issue of, training like an athlete is, as we attempt to age well, is just stupid. Because give 110%, you can't give more than you have. Um, and I don't know that, it's wrong to say don't give 100% as we age either. You just have to be smart about how you're training and doing the type of training that is going to improve function, improve performance, improve one's health, and not going to the point of trying to exceed, you know, a normal healthy capacity. And also, as we are attempting to age well and we go through these habits, we have to go back to that whole concept of opportunity costs. To train like an athlete, athletes are sacrificing a significant amount of their time in the day to train for that particular sport, which means they're sacrificing relationships, they're perhaps sacrificing, certain growth in the other areas that, make for a more balanced individual. Athletes are not necessarily balanced, and it becomes much more difficult. If you're a professional athlete and you're spending your work day preparing, then yeah, you still have time perhaps for family, for, you know, social interactions, for community activities, for, contributing back to society and those types of things. But, for the average person, it's working, at least an 8 hour a day and trying to exercise and do all this stuff. You can't put the effort in that an athlete has to put in.
But you're saying like train for a well balanced body and get all the movements in on that frontal sagittal plane, and everything you do forward you want to do backwards. Does that make sense? Like you want to be so in tune with your body, you're not just in that one dimension of only just a secular workout, because it's
secular workout,
yeah, it's gonna carry
to a religious workout.
Exactly. You don't want to just go in and I just did my bicep curls. Like you want to make sure you're doing lunges, moving forward, going backward lunges, going side lunges. Just have that all around balance of the human body.
Yeah,
you're looking at me all weird, but
sure of comparing biceps to lunges, but from a training in the dimensions of physical fitness, we want to make sure that we are hitting all of those components, that we are over the course of our periodization. So again, we want to have a more annualized plan. We want to have a plan to our exercise. We should be focused on having some level of cardiorespiratory endurance training, which as we age, if we build it up early enough, it's relatively easy to maintain cardiovascular health. And it doesn't take a lot of time and contribution of time to at least slightly improve or to maintain our cardiorespiratory endurance. I mean, we've talked about that before. Tabata style training, high intensity interval type training reduces the amount of time that we necessarily spend. We can still improve our VO2 max, and we can maintain and have a healthy heart functioning for our third age and on into our fourth age. Where we tend to neglect a lot of that is a lot more people tend to ignore some of the importance of muscle strength, maybe functioning a little bit more in doing more muscle endurance type activities, high repetitions. But we need to be trying to get stronger, at least maintaining strength, which is our ability to lift a maximal effort, for one repetition as much as possible. And then in that process, also improving our flexibility and focus on diet and muscle mass so that we improve our body composition. But then when we get into those more sport related components, doing some things that are going to better promote balance, so multi-directional type of movements, coordination and balance, single leg versus double leg type of activities, not necessarily doing all our exercises on Basu balls or instability or unstable surfaces, because that's not going to help us build strength per se, but doing the things that are causing us to have to react, to respond, and to move multi-directionally should be a huge component of our training for physical fitness.
do you think as a time saver, perhaps, to build that muscle strength, maybe include one of Mike Metzer's training into it as far as hit goes and giving it that maximum effort in a short amount of time?
I mean, again, it depends on what your goals are and the time contribution that you have to the exercise. I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with high intensity training when it comes to weight training. I mean, I kind of was weaned on Nautilus when I was younger, um, but I also find that for most people, going to that level of failure is nearly impossible. We don't have that level of dedication. And if we're doing free weight exercises, it's almost impossible to do that appropriately. You cannot go to a true level of failure on a squat exercise because somebody's going to get hurt. And most of that training that Mike Metzger was doing was on Nautilus equipment or on machines that allow for more isolation and forcing the muscle beyond the normal levels of fatigue. And that's not absolutely necessary for an individual. Going near failure for a single set can be beneficial, but also multiple sets for an individual. And I think, that becomes a whole nother discussion for this podcast to kind of go into some of the other different ways that we can train for muscle strength, muscle endurance that will promote and maintain muscle hypertrophy. But I think it's important that we are stressing the muscle. We need to be overloading. We need to be focused on that overload principle. So obviously, we talk a lot about the dimensions of physical fitness on this program. In the habit of maintaining fitness, they introduce the idea of mental fitness. I would think of this more in terms of mental health. And so I did what I'm commonly doing lately is I'm kind of going to ChatGPT for a little bit of guidance on, hey, kind of what's the AI tell me are some of these different concepts and whatnot. And so I asked it about mental health, and it basically responded, mental health is a complex and multifaceted concept that encompasses various dimensions. While there are different models and frameworks used to understand mental health, it lists some commonly recognized dimensions. And I thought, the list of dimensions was pretty good and might be worth kind of talking about in a little bit more detail. So the first one that they introduce is emotional well-being. Number 2 is psychological well-being. Social well-being is number 3. Cognitive functioning, number 4. 5, behavioral health. And 6, spiritual well-being. And this, as I kind of went through the list, it's like, wow, they're kind of talking about my list of well-centered fitness, which includes the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social dimensions. So let's kind of dive into those a little bit. Thoughts on emotional well-being?
Yeah, I think emotional well-being is really important because if you think about it, a lot of people in today's day and age, they're going to make a lot of decisions or react based off of that emotion. There's going to be times where maybe you don't want to go to the gym because you're not feeling motivated or you're feeling down or you're feeling whatever. Well, that's where it's important to have that emotional well-being and that sense of purpose, that sense of happiness, that sense of drive and motivation to go out and do stuff.
And I think, emotional well-being, we're dealing a lot more really with how we are interacting with the stressors in our lives and the challenges we face. There's a lot to kind of the emotional side. I think, it's that effort to be overall more positive relative to negative, starting our day maybe with journaling to just kind of set that positive dimension. Have positive thoughts, as positive affirmations. I think this is where I like to talk about gratitude. Gratitude with two T's really comes into play. The concept of Haval that we've talked about as well, where you're just kind of letting things go and realizing that it's all just mist. It's all just the wind. It's the troubles that we're going through are going to pass. Um, we just need to kind of let go of them. We need to kind of understand where they might be directing us in our life. But when we talk about emotional well being, it's really just managing our emotions and understanding that it's okay to have the emotions that we have. It's okay to be angry at times. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be happy. And just understanding where it's appropriate and where sometimes our emotions may be getting the better of us. And I think as we look at kind of generations coming up now, I don't think they're being trained as well to deal with emotions. We are increasingly becoming a society of victims, and we don't take accountability for our responses. We point fingers, we generate blame. And I think that is rather unhealthy as we are preparing for third age and on into fourth age. Learning to accept responsibility for our responses to the things that happen to us. As Forrest Gump said, it happens. When those things happen in life, I think a positive emotional well-being is to be able to say, okay, this has happened to me. What is the good that can come out of this? Why did this happen? How can I turn this into something more positive, more beneficial? And I think if we can take that kind of focus, we're going to age well.
I think it's also just don't react off the emotion right away. So many people react, they feel an emotion and they allow that emotion to control them or guide them. And then on top of that, you're right. We do live in a society where people can't handle their emotions. They instantly want to pull out their phone and they want to express it out into the world. They want to go onto Yelp and just destroy a business. They want to throw it on any social media platform and say, look at this individual, blah, 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 or I'm going to voice my opinion because I'm so passionate about this in this moment in time. And the thing is, once it's out there forever. And it's a weird concept because in the past, people could somewhat react off an emotion and vocalize their opinion, but then a couple years later, their opinion may change, and they're not as passionate about that because that emotion, it just kind of faded away. Now people don't have that luxury. Whatever their opinion was 2 years ago, 10 years ago, it's now gets thrown back at them, right? It's all around us. So I think at this point in time, we really need to be aware of our emotional state of mind and how that affects us and how we can't just make a decision on whatever it is that we're feeling. There's several of us that will experience something in life and it will either get really angry or really sad or whatever the case may be. Take a deep breath, count to 10, do that magic trick, and see what your next response is going to be before just initially reacting off of it.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Yeah, I think that. But also, I'm not too opposed to people expressing their emotions in the moment. If you are angry in the moment, just understand that if you say something that you can regret, you got to own it. And
That's also true.
I don't fault somebody for being angry and expressing it and then come back and say, look, I'm sorry. I was a little over the top there. That's fine. To me, that's a little bit more emotional well-being. Too much in society now is when we are online, we can express things to somebody who is not in front of us and we don't have to take ownership of it. And I think emotional well-being is just, again, trying to manage our emotions. So if we can control, if we can just take that moment, take a breath, and get a hold of our emotional response before we express it, that's great. Um, but if we are in the moment, a good way of coping with stress sometimes is just letting it out. I mean, sometimes we have to let people be angry, and once that anger gets out, then they can kind of rein it back in and say, okay, I'm under control now. I'm sorry. Um, I can now deal with it. So emotions are really, it becomes a bit of emotional well-being becomes a bit of a two-way street. We have to allow people the opportunity to express their emotions, and we should allow ourselves to express our emotions. We shouldn't try and just bottle things up, but we got to take ownership of it.
Right.
And so emotional well-being is just trying to focus on being as positive as possible and maintaining that positivity as we move forward, as we face adversity, as we encounter stress in our lives. Psychological well-being, I think, that kind of overlaps with the first habit when we talked about maintaining self-esteem. So psychological well-being is having a positive self-esteem, having a sense of purpose. And when I write purpose, I like to use a capital P to kind of make it more that universal purpose, that reason why we are here, why we were created, why we were born, why we and how we fit within the universe. And, it also includes autonomy and personal growth. And so psychological well-being is just, that psychological health that oftentimes we ignore, that kind of what we would normally refer to as mental health. If we are struggling with something, we need to find the avenues to work on that, whether it's depression, whether it's a lack of self-esteem, whether it's feelings of a lack of purpose, whatever it might be. Psychological well-being is important.
When I hear psychological well-being, I look at the definition of the cognitive function, which we'll dive into in a bit. But after reading the psychological well-being, it's almost as if for the psychological well-being, you're aware that you're here for a reason, and you need to determine your purpose. Is that how I'm
That's
reading?
a part of it. I mean, It's a sense of purpose.
So it's not all about you. The world doesn't revolve around you. You're a part of something even.
Well, I mean, that's, to me, that sense is the more of the spiritual well-being, as we'll get to. Psychological well-being, I think, is a lot more of that sense of self, that sense of
who am I?
Huh?
Is it like a who am I?
You are.
Okay. Who am I? What's my purpose?
Yeah,
okay.
It's a sense of. I think a lot of this is very overlapping. I mean, emotional and psychological well-being cannot be separated in many ways. As well as we jump into social well-being, which refers to the quality of individual social connections and relationships. All of those are intertwined. Our psychological well-being is going to affect how we interact with other people, but how people interact with us is also going to have an impact on our psychological well-being. And so it very interactive, and social well-being, and I believe that jumps into one of the later, and actually all of this jumps into some of the later habits that are presented in the article, that again we'll share in the discussion notes that kind of detail these 7 habits that we are talking about. But they're all intertwined. I think this whole idea of mental health is really kind of a psychosocial dimension of our overall health. And, I tend to favor anymore talking about anything that we're dealing with, particularly when we're dealing with like exercise science, or as we deal with attempting to age well, that it is all biomechanical psychosocial, that all those components fit together to make us whole and well. And so social well-being is, again, having a sense of belonging to community, being able to engage in healthy relationships with other individuals. Any thoughts on social well-being?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge factor on what creates your personality, your purpose. There's an old saying out there, which is like, show me your friends that you hang out with, and I'll tell you what kind of person that you are. And then also, if you just hang out with the same set of friends, then there is the possible potential of you not being able to grow versus going out and experience what other people bring to the table, learning a new skill, learning a new trade, learning that. And that's all intertwined with our social outlook, right? It can help broaden our mind. It can help us interact with people. It can help with job interviews when you shake someone's hand. That's a social interaction. And so having that well balance of that social well-being and being aware of your surroundings, or being able to read a room, or being able to read people and have that social intelligence, to me, I think that's one of the most important factors in life, especially if you're going to be working with people, or you're going to be intermingling with people, whether it's a family function, whether it's a fundraiser, whether it's your coworkers. You have to have that level of social intelligence, and you can only get that through social experience.
And then cognitive functioning, that's one of the biggest worries, I think, for a lot of people as they enter third age and as they approach fourth age is, the risk of declining cognitive function. And basically, cognitive function is just that dimension that involves our ability to think, reason, concentrate, make decisions effectively. Encompasses aspects such as memory, attention, problem solving skills, and our ability to learn and adapt. And I think when we look at maintaining mental health from a cognitive standpoint, this is engaging our brains as much and as often as possible. And that begins, first age, second age. And as we're in third age, I think it becomes even more important to be spending some time learning new things, reading, challenging our mind, playing challenging mental games, and anything that is going to help us to continue to learn and adapt and develop our brains as we hopefully begin to push back any risk of dementia and cognitive decline as we age.
And also with the physical aspect of that, there's countless amount of articles and research that's out there that shows that the physical aspect of working out helps with that cognitive function. Whether your work motor skills or your fine motor skills, it plays a part in that cognitive function. Same with diet and nutrition, same with sleep. So everything that we're doing, not just on a mental factor, but on a physical factor, is going to affect that cognitive function as well.
Well, again, yeah, everything is biomechanical, psychosocial.
Correct.
As we approach overall health and well-being, as we approach our aging well into the third and fourth ages. Behavioral health is what encompasses an individual's actions and behaviors. And we've kind of already touched on this. This kind of fits into the other dimensions as well. In fact, I think this is a little bit more the manifestation of mental health is involving positive behaviors, managing stress, adopting healthy lifestyle habits, avoiding harmful behaviors such as substance and alcohol abuse or self-destructive type of actions. So these are just the choices that we make. And I think we talk about that a lot on the podcast, is that aging well is a matter of choice. What choices are we making? And by listening to this podcast and kind of talking about these, considering these habits that are labeling us to age well, that's our behavioral health. What choices we make. This is that opportunity cost piece that I always bring up, that we have an opportunity to make a decision that is going to be favorable to our aging or is going to work against our aging. And sometimes making an occasional choice that is less favorable but is offset by many other behaviors is okay. Like we can have alcohol on occasion, but excessive alcohol is definitely more self-destructive. We can have an occasional dessert in our diet, but making those choices to where it's going to be a positive rather than a negative to our health are the aspects of behavioral health that are going to help us to age well.
I think it's just discipline, right? That's
Well,
a part of
discipline
that.
is a
Yeah.
component of behavioral health.
Yeah.
Commitment, discipline, consistency, those are all things that come under that umbrella of behavioral health that are impacting how our actions and behaviors are going to help us to age well or not so well.
Mm.
And then spiritual well-being pertains to the individual's sense of purpose, meaning a connection to something greater than themselves. Typically how I define spiritual well-being. It involves having a belief system that may or may not involve a formal religious practice, but it is the practices that nurture the spirit, helping us find a sense of peace and fulfillment. But also, I would lump into that spiritual wellness that sense of other-centeredness as well. Where we're focused not only on ourselves, but on how we interact with the greater.
Why is that not placed at number one?
Well,
Because if you think about it, if you place it at number one, it affects the emotional well-being. It affects that psychological. It affects your social well-being. So if you place that spiritual aspect on number one, it's a trickle-down effect, and it affects all the outcome of all the other ones.
This is not a list that is in any order of priority. I think it's just a list of dimensions that are contributing to mental health. And so it kind of sits in there. I mean, and the important thing is to understand that these are all interconnected and influence one another. One dimension is going to affect another one. That when we look at mental health, it's very much more of a holistic concept, that all of these are going to contribute to one's well-being. And like I mentioned earlier, as I looked at this list that ChatGPT put together, it reminded me of my well-centered fitness concept that includes the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social dimensions. And so, the physical dimension we've already kind of separated out from the mental dimension of health. And then they talk in terms of mental health being spiritual, cognitive or intellectual, emotional, and social. I think those are all intertwined. And I tend to look at well-centered fitness with more of a pyramid type of shape to it. Whereas if you look in a lot of the books on wellness, articles on wellness, they generally kind of depict it as a pie shape where it's all these equal pieces of the pie, include the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social dimensions. Sometimes they'll put occupational in there with wellness. But I look at it as a bit more of a pyramid, not that they're not interrelated, but that at a foundation, we have that spiritual and physical components that kind of feed off of one another, but they are somewhat separate. So we have the physical side, but our spiritual side, being, if you kind of think from a quantum physics standpoint, that the spiritual is all the stuff between the material. That's kind of how I see it. And without building a strong sense of spiritual purpose and physical purpose and capability, we really can't build into the intellectual. And the intellectual feeds off of those. It helps us to foster a better emotional well-being. And then ultimately, our social dimension is going to be dependent upon all of those. Spiritually, we are looking at being other-centered. That's going to impact our spiritual or our social dimension. Being capable of doing physical things contributes to our social interactions. Intellectual, it's something to kind of talk about and share with people when you have knowledge of many things. And an emotional, our ability to respond and interact with others is going to be very much dependent upon our social well-being. Healthy social relationships are going to depend on a foundation of spiritual, physical, intellectual, and emotional well-being. And then as we attempt to grow, we are growing all those dimensions kind of simultaneously. And so that pyramid is both kind of hierarchical to a certain extent, but it's also ever expanding multidimensionally. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's just, they're all intertwined.
Yeah, they're all intertwined, but it's more than just a simple equal contribution, or thinking of it as maybe the binding of the twines in a rope or something like that. It's much more complex, multidimensional approach to our overall purpose in being. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that kind of brings us to this idea, the habit 2 is described as maintaining fitness. And I take a little bit of challenge of that, or I challenge that a bit, in that I don't think it's the best for aging well to just simply say I'm going to maintain my health. Or maintain my fitness. I want to be growing my fitness as I enter into that third age and beyond. Because the more I'm continuing to grow, whether it's spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, or social, throughout both the first age, second age, and especially in the third age, the more that is going to have a positive impact on my fourth age. So what do you think on that?
Totally. But I also don't think it has to be the third age. I think if we get a head start on that first and second, it carries forward all the way to the end.
So yeah, I mean, that's what I said. It's basically a growth mindset throughout
Right.
the ages. It's not just simply, lay a foundation and then maintain it, and for many people going into that third age, they've maybe neglected many of these areas, and those areas need to pick up a little bit.
Right.
So you look at we talked about it, training an athlete. Many of our athletes have had to neglect some of those other components in training for their competition. And as they retire from that, which is technically moving them into that maybe third age, and I think we can even look at third age as being multidimensional. We have our kind of our occupational retirement, and so you look at a professional football player, they're going through their first retirement maybe when they hit about 40 or something like that. But they're not retired. They're not maybe officially in that fourth age, but they're kind of, or third age. They're in that kind of third age professionally, where now they're shifting into maybe another career that might give them another 20, 30 years before they retire again. And so, this splitting us up at first age, second age, third age, fourth age, it's never perfectly black and white as we transition from one to the next. I think we talked about in the last episode, it's hard to identify when Betty White was in third age versus fourth age, just because she was so active and involved in her career right up to the point of when she died. So the important thing as we look at aging well, I think, is to take these habits and look at them from a growth mindset as opposed to just simply a maintenance mindset.
I think that's the best advice someone who is either starting their journey or they're already on their path towards that final goal or final destination. I think you're nailing it. Start off strong, maintain, and if you slacked off a bit, pick up the pace.
And I don't know that it's ever perfectly maintained, other than the fact that maybe in a certain physical dimension, you have kind of elevated yourself to that kind of elite status within that component. You're an Olympic marathon runner. You are not going to be running marathons at the same pace you did in your 20s and 30s as when you're in your 40s and 50s or 60s. And so, the pace is going to slow down a little bit. Maybe you're not running the same kind of distance. But we could still look at, what is the measure of cardiorespiratory endurance, your VO2 max. And always kind of frustrates me in the exercise physiology lab when I look at the charts of where you should be in your VO2 max. And there's a significant drop off from what's exceptional when you're in your 20s to what's exceptional when you're in your 60s. And so I know my cardiovascular performance has dropped off significantly from my 20s, but I'm still classified as exceptional. And I don't know about that. I would prefer to be higher. And I think we have to really look at exceeding what is considered the norm as we are attempting to age well. And so even though normally you're going to see a significant decline in physical health as we age through from second to third age and on into fourth age, the goal should be to see less of a decline than we are seeing in our peers, and trying to maintain as much of that as possible. And so if we're really kind of high levels, I mean, you're a power lifter, you're a bodybuilder, you're not going to be able to maintain that throughout the third age as well. But if you are more of that average individual, you have reasonable strength, you could still get stronger. You could continue for as long as possible gaining strength. And eventually, when you're kind of getting a little bit closer to that asymptote of the genetic ceiling, then you start to kind of focus on maintaining that for as much and as long as possible. But I think a growth mindset is critical to aging well. And so I would say that this habit 2 should be to improve and maintain our fitness. Always striving to get better, to be our best today, to be better tomorrow.
Yeah, totally. And also don't limit yourself to that normal range, that little, this is in the norm. It's why, don't limit yourself, especially if you're in the lower end. Why would you not want to exceed and go to that higher end to be better? I don't know, that mindset of, well, I'm passing, or, I'm normal, but I'm on the low end of it. That I cannot wrap my mind around that. I just be the best at what it is that you're doing. Just be, I don't know. That's just me.
I often tell my students that I have this goal in life that, my high school, we have reunions every 5 years. We missed our last one because of COVID, which really annoyed me. But my goal is to go back to each of those reunions in proportionally better shape than my classmates. And, not as kind of a competition. I mean, I want to see all my classmates maintain good health and everything. But the idea is that we know that the average person is going to decline with a certain level of or rate of decline as they age. But if we put the extra effort in, we focus more on the critical factors of health and well-being, we won't see as much decline. And so there's greater and greater separation as we age along with our peers.
Right.
And so I always joke that when I'm, well into my 80s, all the girls in my class be saying, remember what a great athlete he was in high school? Because I wasn't that great of an athlete. But because, you maintain a much greater, level, the memories are going to slip a little bit, and they're going to think you were much more fit and stronger when you were younger. So it's kind of a little goal that I have in order to age well. But I think it's important, if we look at fitness that way, is how much can we hold on to, how much can we maintain and separate ourselves from our peers as we age, then the more likely we are to prolong third age and delay and really shorten the fourth age. So this was habit 2, maintaining fitness. So let's focus in on trying to do the things that give us a balanced diet, participate in regular exercise, and do the things that are going to help us mentally, psychologically, and socially in order to
age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.